Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Campus Debates by the Debate Association of Kenya. My name is Masi Vugutsa, and as always, I am your host for tonight and all the shows to come. I know some of you are wondering, what is this show that has just popped up on your screen on Monday at 8 p.m.? This is Campus Debates, where young people come to have engaging and intellectual conversations about anything and everything that exists within society. Could be something affecting me, affecting you, or affecting anyone that you know. At the same time, could be something you watch on news outlets or something of the sort, but we're here to give you solutions, ideas, and opinions. And the best thing about it is, it's from the perspectives of young people and university students. Isn't that beautiful? Let us understand a few things about this new system. If this is your first time viewing, here are a few things for you to know about Season 2 Campus Debates. It's a point system where if you win, you get 3 points. If you don't win, you get 1 point. But if you have good speaker scores, you don't have to fight for your lives in the knockout rounds. The knockout rounds are soon approaching, and the teams will battle each other and fight to remain in the game if they do not manage to win their first 2 rounds. But if they can win their knockout rounds, then you will definitely see them in the second preliminary rounds, all culminating to 1 champion and 1 winner. I know you're eager to find out who will win this Campus Debate Season 2, so ensure that you watch every Monday at 8 p.m. for you to be able to tell which university will go away with the crown of Campus Debate Season 2. The motion for this round reads, this House regrets the government of Kenya's proposal to transition all public service staff from permanent and pensionable to contract terms. This House regrets the government of Kenya's proposal to transition all public service staff from permanent and pensionable to contract terms. While you're marinating on that motion, I would love to welcome the speakers for this debate. From side proposition, we have the team from United States International University, USIU. Here. And from side opposition, we're joined with African Nazarene University. I will allow them to introduce themselves to you and tell you something interesting about them, and maybe they'll pique your interest and hopefully intrigue you for the round. Side proposition.
My name is Angel. I go to USIU. Something interesting about me is, well, I do data science and analytics. Something that's interesting about me is that I used to do taekwondo. Yeah.
That's interesting. That's actually really interesting.
Thank
you. My name is Joshua. I'm a student at USIU. I'm a computer science major. One interesting thing about me is I love tennis, I guess. Djokovic is my favorite player. Yeah, I've loved it since I was a kid.
All right, you've heard from side proposition, data science and computer science combined. I think that's enough to beat side opposition, but let's hear from them as well.
I'm Nina Wairimu, studying landscape architecture, here to represent African Nazarene University. Something interesting about me, I really talk. I talk for long. I like to talk.
She likes to talk. That's interesting.
That's it.
I'm Michael Daniel from African Nazarene University. I'm currently pursuing my bachelor's degree in mass communication and journalism. An interesting aspect about me is that I do poetry, and I've participated in 2 anthologies that have been released.
You have heard from side opposition, poetry and a talker. I think that's already interesting to ensure that we have an intriguing round from the speakers before us today. Without further ado, we'd love to welcome the judges to introduce themselves and tell us what they expect from the speakers that we have.
Hello, I'm Winnie Sydney. I'll be your panelist, and I'm wishing you all the best. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Perez Ngono, and I'm going to be the chair for this round. Let us have a lovely debate.
Hey, Mercy, you look pretty today. Unakaa fiti. Anyway, my name is Brian Windy, and I'll be on the panel today. And I'm really excited to sit on the same panel with the best judge that I've been able to been working with for a very long time, Ms. Perez, and we hope to have a very interesting debate today. Thank you.
The judges are equally tasked with the possibility to judge these amazing teams before us. Like you've already heard the motion, I think we're ready for the speakers to give us a wonderful round. With that, we welcome side proposition first speaker, here.
Okay, I begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. So the motion of the day is that this House regrets the government of Kenya's proposal to transition all public service staff from permanent and pensionable to contract terms. Now, I'm going to do a bit of contextualization, just putting the motion in context, informing you who exactly is involved and what exactly each kind of employment looks like, right? What does contract work look like? What does permanent work look like, right? So first of all, what contract work looks like, which is what we are supporting, right, is that a team is, which is what we are not supporting, is that a team is hired that gives contracts to these people, right? And I will tell you why exactly this is problematic and what permanent work looks like more often than not, especially with public service, is that you still have temporary workers, you still have interns. That's how most people start, right? Most people start as temporary workers and work their way to a permanent position. So please note that temporary workers exist in both worlds, right? They exist in our world, they exist in their world. What changes is that in their world, they only have contract workers, right? Why is this problematic? First of all, let's keep in mind that this debate is not about competency. It's not about the worst workers, right? We feel like what they're about to come and tell us is that when you have contract work, you can readily get rid of the worst performing workers, and we don't think that's the case, and I'll expound on that. First of all, in both worlds, you can still be fired. Please note, even as a permanent employee, you can be fired. And so this debate cannot be about the worst employees. It is about the best employees and how best to keep them and how best to retain them. And I will tell you why we achieve that on our side, right? So first of all, we need to keep in mind that for you to be able to get contract work again and again, considering that it is a team that is giving you this contract, you don't necessarily have to be good at your work, especially considering you're a temporary employee. You just need to be liked by the team. We feel that creates a lot more capacity for these people to be able to put people of interest in these positions. And we will go into why they're likely to do this and why this is problematic, right? So first of all, we believe that there is more space to have incompetent workers in temporary positions than there is to have them in permanent positions, because there's an eye on you constantly. You cannot keep, it does not make any sense resourceful-wise for an organization to be able to keep incompetent people in a permanent place. Whereas with contracts, you constantly change people, and so it's very likely that you'll have incompetent people, right? So why are these contracts likely to go to the wrong people? First of all, political turnovers, right? For example, you have ambassadors, right? For example, you would be able to put an ambassador in a position which creates, in a position at the point of a political turnover, and you're likely to give it to the person who supports you, right? So this creates an incentive for someone to support you because you're in a position where you can readily be able to give them the promises that you've given them, right? If I tell you I can give you a government job, right, and I'm in a position where I know that these people are going to leave, then obviously I can give that to you, and that creates an incentive for support that then undermines the democratic process, right? That's one reason that you can be given that. Second of all, connections still exist. At the point at which you know that these people are going to go, these connections that I am telling you will continue to exist at a larger scale, because you can literally just bring anyone and you can get rid of the people that you don't want there. So please note that the people you're going to keep are not even necessarily. This creates so much space for personal bias, right? Because you could have the most competent employees, but because they did something to someone on the team that they did not like on a personal level, they have an incentive to want to not give this person the contract the next time, right? Please note that we need to consider the majority for every debate that we have, right? And we feel like the majority of public service workers are low-income earners. And this is something that we need to put into perspective, right? Because this is a permanent and pensionable job, essentially. So when you have a permanent and pensionable job, you have job security and you know that you're going to have pension. Why is this something that we support, right? First of all, low-income earners, as we tell you, most of these places already have temps, right? People start as temporary workers and then they become permanent workers, which means that more often than not, they have already proved themselves, or they will have to continue to prove themselves because they know that their position is at risk at the point at which they have a permanent position. So we feel like job security then acts as an incentive to perform. At the point at which you know you can lose this contract at any point, and you know that the people who are going to get in are likely the people who have appealed to the team, you do not necessarily have any incentive to actually do the best that you can, A. B, you're completely unsure about whether you're going to be able to keep providing for your family, even at the point at which you do a good job. And we do not feel that that is the best case. Why, again, is this still problematic? What does this mean for the private versus public services? In status quo, we already have private services being preferable to public services, and therefore we need the most improvement we can get from public services. And the way that we get that is retaining the best employees. In a world where the only public service work that exists is contractual, you're constantly fighting to be able to keep your position, right? So why, as a competent employee that can get into the private sector, why then would you choose the public sector when you know that your job there is not secure? No, you'll obviously go for the private sector, and obviously then this continues the system whereby the private sector is continuously better than the public sector, and that's not something that we want to continue to exist, right? Second of all, we believe that a social contract exists, right? For you to work for the government then has a duty to be able to provide for you, right? And this is where the pensionable comes in. We do not feel that we support a world where you work for the government on contracts and your work is not pensionable, right? Because when you work for the government, on principle, it should be able to cater for you at the point of retirement, at the point where you're no longer working for them. And with that, I rest my case. Thank you.
Do you think, from side proposition, that the government actually owes you to give you a permanent and a pensionable job? Now, we welcome side opposition to respond to proposition and at the same time give us their argument. Here.
Panel, there's a very important actor in this debate that I feel has been overlooked. And without us actually focusing on that, then we completely lose the main idea of this whole motion, right? This House regrets the government of Kenya's decision to transition public service staff from permanent to contract terms, right? Now, what is the government of Kenya? What does it look like and what are its incentives, right? The government of Kenya has been democratically elected to serve the people, not civil servants, right? So we cannot treat civil servants as the majority because the government has a principal obligation to work for the best interests of its people. Secondly, this is not the government of Asia, it's not the government of the US, it is the government of Kenya. Kenya currently is an African third world country riddled with problems. We do not have money, we have problems of infrastructure. Recently, we're experiencing loss of lives, damage of property, and ruining of infrastructure due to floods, which is why in our world, we believe that cost control and flexibility is highly important, especially in a government like this. And I will tell you why. One thing. What do these public service staff actually look like? Because we've already heard from the first speaker, right? But we believe that this is a person who works for the government. Remember, this is the Kenyan government. It is not perfect, it is not utopic. It is addled by problems like tribalism, corruption, addled by things like nepotism. So there is no way to actually guarantee that in their world, the people who are actually given these jobs are qualified in any way whatsoever. We've had issues of entire cabinet secretaries all coming from the same tribe. We have people who have links to the government simply because they're relatives are in certain positions of power. So we even question the incentives of these civil servants and how they have actually been employed. Secondly, we have things like ghost workers, people who have no jobs in the government, but continuously are entitled to pensions and things like that. And that can only be existing and perpetuated by permanent and pensionable terms such as that they are defending. Now, secondly, we need to understand, right? When you have a permanent and pensionable term, you are contract term, whatever, you are entitled to a salary and you are guaranteed a pension once you reach a certain age and you actually have achieved a certain thing. What this leads to, as much as they're talking about job security leads to laxity, especially in the government. We have seen it work. We have seen people complaining in universities that whatever knowledge they got from their public schools is insufficient to make them survive in the actual world. So even teachers, for example, as public civil servants, we still have people who are lax. works because they know they have a job, they know they have money, they know they are going to have some sort of benefit regardless of what output they put. Now, why are we bringing contracts into this? And why are we supporting that contracts exist? Because one, once you believe and you are aware that the tenure that you have has an expiry date and there is no pension, then there is need for you to work your hardest to produce the best output in order to renew contracts. They're speaking from a point of you suddenly get random people every time, but contracts can be renewed. And if you actually prove your talent, it's going to be more inclusive. It won't work from a point of tribes. It won't work from a point of nepotic connections, but rather it is going to come from a point of talent because now you have an incentive to renew your contract. And once again, the government has an obligation to its people. Therefore, the civil servants will work for the betterment of the people if they want to retain their jobs. And that is what we want. We do not really care about job security if it is at the detriment of infrastructure, if it is at the detriment of the happiness of the people of Kenya, because that is who the government is here to serve. Secondly, we need to understand that efficiency in enhancing competition is what is going to allow this government to actually move forward. One, I've already talked about the discrimination that comes from tribalism and nepotism and how contracts are going to solve that. But understand, because we have enhanced competition, we have more people from more marginalized areas actually coming up. Because as long as you have a brain, then your tribe does not matter. As long as you can actually provide output to the people, then your links to Uhuru or whatever it is does not matter. We need to have more people with actual talent to actually be included on a basis of their minds, their brains, and what they can actually bring. And that can only be brought to the House when we're talking about contracts. Lastly, we need to understand wastage of money. I've already said we've been flooding, infrastructure has been wasted and all that. And in their world where ghost workers and underqualified workers exist, a lot of government funds have been channeled into that, have been channeled into paying people who are not even working for the people, right? But in our world, since we don't have that, since we are weeding out all the incompetent workers because they only want to focus on positive workers, since we have weeded out incompetent workers, money that would have gone to them can instead now be redirected into improving infrastructure, can instead be redirected into solving issues like poverty, water shortage, and food, right? Now, they've talked about how I've already said how job security does not really count as an incentive to perform. They talk about temporary workers exist in both worlds. But in their world, you can get fired indiscriminately, even as a civil servant. Contracts, you buy into them, you know when it starts, you know when it ends, you know what you earn, right? In their world, the government can choose to sack you whichever way you want. Doctors are currently on strike. They're not earning money either way. Teachers are complaining they have not been paid in decades, right? But at least in our world, people actually buy into something. They know how much they are entitled to earn. They know when this job is going to end. They know what is going to happen. So they cannot talk about temporary workers and how you can fire them. They talk about government turnover. But understand, government turnover actually hurts their world. Because when the government switches from one to another, then civil servants will leave work unfinished. They will leave work that is actually half-baked, and they will not have any incentives to push forward or actually work for betterment despite the government changing, right? My time is up, but my partner will talk about how contracts already exist in the private sector, and we've already seen how the private sector has succeeded. We don't see why that is a problem. We don't see why they are against it. In our world, we believe that we are pushing for the people, not the civil servants, because that is the incentive of the government. Thank you.
You have equally heard from side opposition. They tell you the only way to ensure efficiency exists in these government spaces, and even for the workers as a whole, is to have contractual spaces. And at the same time, they tell you the government of Kenya is already struggling with a lot of bills and a lot of things that they need to do. They do not have finances to actually maintain permanent and pensionable workers. That is side opposition. But side proposition argues that the only way to actually ensure that security in these particular spaces exists is if you have job security through permanent and pensionable jobs. It's been an interesting first half, hasn't it? Now, for you at home, do you think it would be better for you to have a permanent and pensionable job, or would you prefer to actually be contracted, especially by the government of Kenya? We'll be going on a very short break, and we'll be back after us again and actually hanging after our short break. We are back with the second half of the debate. If you were not here for the first half, here's what went down. Side proposition argues for the whole idea of permanent jobs and pensionable jobs actually existing within society. Side opposition argues that they don't think the permanent and pensionable jobs are something that actually needs to exist, especially right now when our government is struggling financially. I know you're as eager as I am to listen to the speakers, so with that, we welcome the second speaker side proposition to finish off their case. Here.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay. I think my first speaker already made it very clear as to our position in this whole motion, but let me just clarify to you, going point by point in regards to what they said. Right? I'll be engaging throughout my speech. I think one of the things that they raise in regards to their speech is that how job security in and of itself that exists in our world is a better motivator for performance compared to constant anxiety that exists in their world. Because they tell us one thing. They tell us that, at the point in which you can be fired at the end of your 5-term contract, it motivates you to perform better because you know your position is always in jeopardy. Here's how we respond. Number one, retainment of workers is not only about performance, it can be about who you know. They're very uncomparative when they come up and say that, magically on their world, you are going to be hired and retained because of some sort of your performance and the objective metrics of who you're employed by. But in our world, there's tribalism that exists, right? Understand that social biases and tribalism exist in both worlds. They can't say that in their world, in our world, people are hired because of tribalism, but in their world, employees are magically hired and retained because of their performance. That's not necessarily within the best interest of this debate. I think we can assume tribalism on both sides. That's not necessarily an argument that can be raised. Secondly, the public sector, which the government operates in, has to compete with the private sector to attract the best talent. Understand, you cannot look at this motion only in the context of the workers in the private sector. You have to look at in the context of also the private sector. What advantages does the private sector have over the public sector? Understand that the public sector is already broke. We can engage with them and tell them the private sector is already broke, so it cannot afford to attract high-quality employees through higher salaries because I cannot offer that in the first place. Secondly, this proposal also cuts pension, reducing the incentive for top talent to work for the government in the first place. Understand, you get worse service provision in their world at the point at which they can't even basically attract the best people who the government can have access to. They're more likely going to the private sector, which has private equity, which can pay people a lot more, which has pension services that are private in nature that can invest in these people's future. We think that these good employees will likely opt into the private sector anyways. The government loses out in their world, right? They have to show us how they still get good quality employees on their side. But even if we concede and say that training will occur and the lackluster employees that they offer after every contractual period will be trained and will be good, here's how that's necessarily a detriment to the government. Understand, number one, they have to expend money on training these employees in the first place. They also have to invest time and resources into training them in the first place. Understand, the whole thing that they ran was efficiency. The government is broke, they don't necessarily have time. There's crises that happen within status quo, and we need to invest all our resources in retaining the best people. They cannot do that at the point in which in every year, every 5 months, they're hiring a new set of people, they're training them, and even at the point in which the training is good and these are good quality employees, they just opt out to the private sector at the point at which they're necessarily tired of every 5 months being on the chopping block, not knowing if they have job security in the first place, even though they're necessarily good. I already told you the fact that it doesn't necessarily have to be you're a good employee. It's also about who you know. We can see that tribalism is on both sides of the world. At the point in which they do not have an incentive as to why a good quality employee wants to work for the government necessarily loses on their side, right? There naturally exists high turnover in opposition side because good workers do not want to work in the government in the first place. What's a long-term impact, right? You have constantly attracting low-skilled workers, whereas the government has to spend time and money in training just for them to opt out and leave to the private sector. Understand that's resources that the government is actively losing to the private sector. They're investing in people who do not want to work for the government. All the tax money that the government is spending on training these people will not go back to the public who actually pays those taxes, right? It goes into the private sector, which is used for private equity that's not necessarily impacting the population in and of itself, right? Understand, on both sides, if a worker is terrible, they will be fired. This debate cannot be about the worst employee. It has to be about the best employee and which side best attracts them, as my partner said, right? The metric of regret that we work with is that we regret this proposal because it actively erodes the government's ability to attract the best workers, which impacts quality service position, right? They told us that this cannot be about public servants because they're not the majority. I already gave you engagement on how the majority actively loses at the point in which they pay taxes to train individuals who don't necessarily actually benefit the public at the point in which they become skilled. Secondly, we believe that this process was principally unjustified, specifically within the context of eroding pension infrastructure. Understand, in their world, a good employee who is competent and wants to work for the government and ends up working for the government for their entire adult lives ends up completely screwed once they retire and aren't be able to be compensated by pension. At the point in which you spent 30 years working for the government and the government doesn't even have the decency to protect you, at the point in which you can't work, let's say you're sick, let's say you have to take care of your family, let's say you have dependents that you're still taking care of. At the point in which that's true, they're not taking care of this, right? This becomes principally unjustified at the fact that the government already does not invest in social security programs, right? At the point in which there's no something like UBI that exists within our nation, right? It makes sure that at the point in which somebody who spends their lives working for the government should, at the basic level, be compensated for the work that they invested in the government. We think that's principally consistent in our world. Even at the point in which it costs the government money, we don't necessarily think that saving money is the most important thing within this debate. At the point in which people are actively being hurt, we protect the most vulnerable individuals on our side. They cannot engage with that, right? Also on engagement, they state that nepotism exists on our side, right? They can't, as I said, they can't say that in our world people are hired because of tribalism, but in their world it's completely egalitarian. Also on engagement, they say that job security leads to laxity, i.e. you do not want to work harder at the point in which you know your job is necessarily guaranteed. There's other incentives that exist within the job structure that makes you work harder. Things like, I don't know, promotion, things like getting a higher salary. That makes people want to work harder. That's why at the point in which I'm a low-level employee, even though my job is guaranteed, I want to work harder because I want to become the CEO. I want to become the manager. Incentives exist on our side completely. We don't necessarily see how that point stands. Secondly, they say that you can be fired indiscriminately in our world at the point in which you have this permanent contract. We don't necessarily see how that's likely to exist. But but understand that employment terms still exist in our world that says that you'll be fired if you don't do X, Y, Z. But even if that's true, we think it's a good thing at the point in which you're going to be indiscriminately fired. That means you're going to work harder because you don't know whether you're going to be fired or not. That's a good side. That's a good on our world. Rest our case. Thank you.
I think side proposition has been able to convince you enough that you need to be a permanent and pensioned worker rather than a contracted worker. But let us hear from side opposition. Let's see whether they can sway you further into actually opting into a contractual job rather than a permanent and a pensionable job. With that, we welcome the second speaker, side opposition, to complete their case. Here.
The government of Kenya's proposal to transition all public service staff from permanent and pensionable to a contract. The impacts, I'm going to bring them down to you. My partner has clearly given you a framing of what our world looks like and what we actually stand for. However, as I'm giving down my impacts, I'd love the opposition to just answer this burden. Prove to us how the status quo has succeeded currently with still the reinstatement of pensionable and permanent positions still in existence. How has that actually helped in actually delivering efficiency, accountability, and inclusivity in the current society that we're living in Kenya as a third world country? They need to tell us that if they're going to win this. Panel, understand this. In our world, we're telling you simply this. We have much more skilled labor. Yes, there might be actually possibilities that they actually have that in their world as well. But the actuality that in our world, you will find as much skilled labor as much as possible is actually much more in our world. Why? Because you're being told you are on a contract. Fine, if it's 5 months, people get tired. After every 5 months, people are being removed. At least in our world, we are pointing out to you that the government is working, because if you are there in power and you've been under a contract, the contract states this and this. You are supposed to have achieved this milestone and this goal by this point and this time within your tenure. If you fail to do that, we remove you out of office. If 5 people fail to do that within the period of 10 months, then we'll still remove them out of office, because we are chasing what? We are chasing efficiency. We believe in our world we are going to accrue better efficiency for not just that person who's supposed to fulfill, maximally utilize their potential as a person, as an individual in the state, and also to the people themselves. We tell you that that's what we are doing. Panel, understand this. In our world, we're telling you that there's cost control. Contracts need a buy-in. Therefore, there's no room for exploitation of funds allocated for the people or for any sector. That's what we are telling you. In our world, we point out to you that there's a reduced retaliation. Why? Because if there's proof of accountability within that sector, if there's proof that this person got into this position on basis of merit, people will not go outside and strike and say that there are ghost workers here because they have not been seen. In our world, we tell you that we do not need to wait for a government turnover to make a change. We do not need to wait and sit for 5 years because apparently this person was put in power by us under a contract of 5 years. We tell you that, sorry, not under a contract, but under that tenure of 5 years. We tell you that if you've been put in power and you are the PS of transport, why are there too much accidents happening right now? But because the PS of transport knows that I'm going to be in power for the next 2 years, I can jump over this problem that we're facing right now. The next time we actually get a success, I'll take credit for it and I'll still eat my pension after my power. That's what we're telling you. That's what they're saying they're going to do. But if the PS of transport is under a contract, and it's plainly written down and stated clearly that as a PS of transport, these and these states of road need to have been cleared and made better by the end of this year, by that contract. If that PS has failed to do that, that PS goes home. If the next PS comes in power and fails to do that as well, that PS goes home. Simple as that. You don't need to wait for another 5 years for another PS to come in and make work. Plus, in their world, it is clearly, of course, it is clearly evident that if a PS fails to do some sort of work, the next government can decide to abscond whatever that government was doing and start up a new project. What does it show you now in their world? In their world, projects are even left halfway based on the competency of our government. In our world, they're telling you, despite the competency of the government, based on the contract that is apparently there, you will have to do your work regardless. Panel, our world gives room for swift accountability during problems faced. That is where we rank above them. Our world tells you that if there's a problem based on the contract, you can terminate it immediately, renew another one, and get someone better to do that job, unlike theirs. In our world, financial literacy is accrued and achieved because people save instead of counting on pension. Something that they fail to tell you. They tell you about compensation of people based on pension. Panel, why should they compensate you yet you failed as a leader? Why should they compensate you yet you failed as a teacher? Why should they put you in? Why should they give you anything? It does not work like that. We're looking for efficacy, we are looking for accountability, we're looking for justifications for people to continue existing and enjoying their freedom. Then why should they in any way pay for that and continue paying for a CS or an NMP who failed to actually modernize my location or my village because apparently he's retired, so I'm supposed to continue paying my taxes to compensate that person based on pension? It does not work like that, panel. Let that be understood, panel. They are saying compensation based on whatever work you've done. If you could not finish your work, then you shouldn't have started it. Let that be evident. Panel, how are you the best if you never even competed or fought for that position? They're telling you that, fine, in their world, apparently, I don't know, nepotism that is based on both sides. As my time is finishing, nepotism is based on both sides. Panel, it doesn't work like that. In our world, we're telling you that you're the best based on merit of a contract, because that's how a contract works. A contract works purely on meritocracy. Whether you or not you are able to find that contract by connection, the fact that you are going to finish that work based on the contract of merit. If you cannot do that work, even if you know the owner of the contract clearly states you need to go, you will go. We tell in our world, efficiency is best accrued. Again, if they fail to actually convince you that they have failed in the current status quo to actually achieve accountability and efficiency, then they do not win this debate at all. Because I've told you clearly, in our side, efficiency is accrued, accountability, and inclusivity for that matter. Compensation is actually done based on the contract. And with that, we believe we win. Thank you so much.
I think this has been one of the most interesting episodes that we've had so far. And they've actually offered to you their opinions, their ideas, and their possible solutions to the current problems that public servants actually face in society today. The biggest clash for this argument, which is like the biggest argument you are getting from both sides, which world actually offers the highest level of efficiency by either getting the best workers or getting the best capacity to actually complete jobs and offering accountability to these workers as a whole. I think that has been interesting up until this point. But with that, we'll be going on a small break for you to marinate on the words that you've gotten from both proposition and opposition. When we are back, we'll hear from the judges what their verdict is and which team particularly were they Welcome back, and thank you for choosing to stay with us even after the short break. We are back with an intriguing section in this particular part where we get to hear from the judges who has won and who has not. What has existed in the first two parts of this debate is side proposition made the argument that retainment of workers needs to exist. Secondly, the only way to attract the best workers in these public spaces and the best way to compete with private sectors is to have permanent and pensionable jobs. They also ensure that they told you that the whole idea of appreciation mechanism needs to exist by having this particular pensionable jobs. But side opposition equally made a really brave argument by saying that this particular contracts offer the best level of accountability for these jobs, and they do not actually leave room for exploitation. And finally, if you have permanent and pensionable jobs, it creates laxity among the people that are currently working in public spaces. Both good arguments from both teams, but the judges feel like they are not yet swayed by either of the teams. With that, we will allow the judges to ask a question to both proposition and opposition and allow them 1 more minute to fight for their lives and convince the judges one last time who has won between the two of them. Over to you, judges.
Okay, to the proposition side, how do you regulate problems experienced under pensionable and permanent workers, like mitigation of problems of ghost workers existing? Thank you.
So yeah, my question goes to side opposition, and this is majorly from the basis of your case. You point out that you're going to compensate qualified workers once they retire under their contract. Now let's put this into perspective. I'm 30 years of age and I'm under 5 years of a contract, and then I do a very good job. So how then do you ensure that I'm going to be compensated when I'm old enough, like 60 or 75 years?
The judges have asked their questions, and with that, we welcome side proposition with 1 minute to respond to their question. Here.
Right. So the question being, how do we best regulate against things like ghost workers, right? I think the basic element of a ghost worker is an employee that was hired, but it's not necessarily adhering to the terms of that employment, right? That's a managerial issue, not an issue that we can necessarily solve on the basis of which contract exists, right? We think at the basic level, at the point in which you are employed, there's a terms of employment that necessarily exists. At the point in which you do not fulfill those terms of employment, you will be fired on our world. Understand something that's coming from their side. They cannot come here and say that, oh, we have this immediate sort of thing at the point in which you do not appeal to like their terms of employment, you will be fired. Understand, if you are hired and 2 months in, you've shown yourself to be completely incompetent, you can be fired. In their world, in 2 months in, if you show yourself to be completely incompetent, you have to be retained until the end of your contract, which is a year later. Understand, we have no mechanisms to get rid of those people that exist in our world. We have more immediacy to get rid of those individuals who are ghost workers on our side compared to their side. Thank you.
Panel, we believe in our world that since contracts have the ability to be renewed, then even at 30 years old, once your contract expires, you can still renew it and continue to work for this government. At a point in time when you have reached retirement age, we believe that contracts, as from our previous arguments, have already motivated you to pursue financial literacy, to pursue saving insurance schemes, pension saving schemes, and what have you. And even then, if you work exceptionally well and you produce good output, there are motivating factors like bonuses and all that. So in your old age, as long as you have renewed your contract, as long as you have worked for the government, as long as you have shown that you have been of benefit to the people, we then believe that through the financial literacy you have accrued by working for these contracts, you will still have some form of leniency in your old age. You will not be left in the dark. Thank you.
This has got to be one of the most interesting debates that we've had in a long time. We are university students, and of course, we're looking to find which particular sector offers the best level of solvency for us when we join the corporate world. Is it the public sector or the private sector? And I think this argument or this debate and this motion specifically has set us up for that. With that, let us hear from the judges with the verdict, who has won and who has lost. Judges.
On a unanimous call, it's government over opposition, and this is the reason why. Let me just go back to the motion. This House regrets the GOK's proposal to transition all public service staff from permanent and pensionable to contract terms. The key terminology here is all public service staff. And the clashes generally is like, how is GOK going to function under the social contract theory to ensure that as it was democratically elected, it is supposed to serve all citizens, not just the civil servants. So the question here is, at a point in time that the GOK social contract theory is only limited to serving probably the prospective youths or just active people, what happens to these people in their old age? Because the social contract theory still applies to them even at their old age. We tend to generally think that at this particular point in time, the social contract theory applies to also give some kind of security to the old people because they also democratically elected this kind of government. Then secondly, the public and the private sector, which was something that we really wanted to kind of come out quite well on the opposition side, is that how do we really ensure that because of this kind of contracts that exist, there is not this kind of in and out such that people who buy into the public sector are not disincentivized to keep on investing there and opt into the private sector. That was a question left unanswered. And we bought into government's word that I think it is far much better when the government of Kenya focuses on probably mitigating the problems that exist in the public so that people are incentivized to keep on investing there. And we, however, have to give it to opposition because meritocracy aspect really came out well on their side because they tell us that there is some kind of allowance for merit to actually be credited on their side. However, when it comes to all permanent and pensionable workers, we tend to think that the social contract theory has to serve them all, and that is why Gov wins over all.
You have heard it from the judges that United States International University have been able to win this round and gather for themselves 3 amazing points. With that, we hope that the next round that they currently have will lead them to have another 3 points, which leads them to 6 points. Hopefully, they won't be in the knockout rounds. As for Nazarene University, on the other hand, they've also been able to gather 1 point for their round, and hopefully amazing speaker scores that they won't be in the knockout rounds. Sadly for them, they haven't been able to win either of their rounds in the preliminary rounds, but the good thing about it is you might just see them one more time fighting for their lives in the knockout rounds, and that means you are guaranteed an interesting debate within the knockout rounds. I hope our government is actually listening because we are telling you that we want permanent and pensionable jobs. As university students, I think that's something we're willing to buy into to give you skills and efficiency. You have heard from the debaters. It has been an interesting round. With that, we have come to the end of the episode. Thank you so much for tuning in on Monday at 8 p.m., staying with us for the entire hour, and we hope to see you next week, same time, same place. My name is Masivu Gutsa, and I was your host.